The restaurant smelled like truffle butter and polished wood. Crystal glasses caught the chandelier light. Soft piano music floated between tables. People laughed in low, controlled tones, the kind that belong in expensive rooms. My sister angled her phone slightly toward me. "Just read it," she said sweetly. The envelope had my name printed in my father's handwriting. My mother sat upright, hands folded, eyes calm. Almost satisfied. I opened the letter. Legal language. Formal. Cold. Disownment. Effective immediately. A waiter paused behind me, unsure whether to pour more water or disappear. No one spoke. They were waiting. Waiting for tears. For shaking hands. For something messy enough to justify what they were doing. My hands didn't shake. I read every word slowly. And when I finished, I reached into my own bag for an envelope they hadn't planned for. My father chose the restaurant carefully. He always did when something needed to look official. Neutral ground, he had said. As if humiliation becomes civilized when it's paired with linen napkins and imported wine. The hostess greeted us by name. My parents arrived first. My sister 10 minutes later, glowing with the kind of excitement she pretends is concern. "You okay?" she asked me softly while setting her phone face up on the table. It wasn't concern. It was positioning. I've seen that look before. Growing up, my sister learned quickly what my parents valued. Presentation. Compliance. Optics. I learned something different. Endurance. At dinner, my father cleared his throat before the appetizers arrived. "We think it's time to formalize things," he said. Formalize. My mother nodded once, like she was approving a business motion. I had spent years building something outside their approval. A tech acquisition firm. Quiet deals. Quiet growth. No family money. No family introductions. They didn't understand what I did. They didn't ask. In their world, success meant visibility. Titles. Applause. Mine was built in silence. Your recent decisions, my father continued, reflect values that don't align with this family. Values. Translation, independence. Translation, refusing to consult them. Translation, not needing them. My sister adjusted her phone slightly. I noticed the red recording light blink once before stabilizing. Have you ever realized you were the only one in the room who didn't know the meeting had been planned without you? The letter wasn't emotional. It was structured. Legal phrasing about inheritance removal, asset exclusion, family trust amendments. They wanted to make it binding. Permanent. My mother finally spoke. "We didn't want it to come to this." Her voice was smooth. Controlled. But I knew something about control. It only works when the other person depends on you. I folded the letter neatly when I finished reading it. No tears. No raised voice. Just paper against paper. "You're not upset?" my sister asked, almost disappointed. I met her eyes. "No." My father leaned back slightly, confused. Because this dinner wasn't about removing me from their will. It was about removing my leverage. And the thing about leverage is that it doesn't disappear just because someone declares it gone. I reached for my bag. And this time, their expressions shifted first. The envelope in my bag had been there all evening. Not as a reaction. As preparation. You don't walk into rooms like that without knowing what might happen. Not when you've grown up in a house where silence was strategy and dinner conversations were negotiations disguised as concern. I slid the envelope onto the table. Not dramatically. Just enough for the paper to touch the white linen between us. My father's eyes dropped to it immediately. He had always noticed documents before people. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I thought you'd want to see," I said. My sister tilted her phone slightly closer. "Still recording?" "Of course." Inside the envelope was a copy of a signed acquisition agreement. My firm had just finalized the purchase of a mid-sized logistics software company. Total valuation, $8 million. My signature was on the last page. So was the bank's. The deal had closed that morning. I hadn't told them. I hadn't needed to. "You started a company?" my mother asked, as if the idea itself felt improper. "I've been running it for 6 years. 6 years. While they discussed my direction and lack of stability at family gatherings. While my sister built her career through my father's connections. While I quietly negotiated contracts in rented offices and late-night conference calls. Have you ever built something so steadily that people assumed you weren't building at all?" My father picked up the document. His thumb brushed the embossed seal. "This is significant," he said carefully. "Yes. And you didn't inform us." I almost smiled. Inform them. Like approval was a prerequisite for competence. The waiter returned to clear untouched plates. He glanced at the stack of papers, then at our faces. He sensed something had shifted but didn't know what. My sister finally spoke. "So you're showing off now?" Her tone tried to land somewhere between teasing and defensive. "No," I said quietly. "I'm clarifying. Because the disownment letter wasn't about money. It was about control. They believed cutting me off would weaken me. That removing inheritance would send me scrambling back for alignment. But inheritance only matters if you're waiting for it. I never was." My father placed the acquisition document back on the table slowly. "You could have involved the family," he said. There it was again. The assumption that success flows upward. That it belongs collectively once it becomes visible. But where were they when the first investor rejected me? When I signed personal guarantees on leases? When I ate at my desk because payroll came first? Silence can be a kind of investment too. And I had invested heavily. The restaurant noise seemed louder now. Glass clinks. Low laughter from other tables. Someone celebrating something small and uncomplicated. At our table, the air felt different. Tighter. Not because I had proven anything. But because the narrative they had prepared for this evening no longer fit. My sister lowered her phone slightly. Not fully. Just enough to show uncertainty. And that uncertainty was the first crack in their composure. But cracks don't appear without pressure. And I wasn't finished speaking yet. My father adjusted his cufflinks. It was a small movement, but I knew it well. He did it whenever a conversation slipped outside his control. "You think this changes something?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't about change. It was about exposure. For years, family dinners followed the same rhythm. My sister shared curated updates. Promotions that came with congratulatory speeches. Partnerships that came through introductions. When it was my turn, the questions were softer. "So, still doing that consulting thing? Is it stable? Do you have benefits?" I used to explain. Used to translate my work into language they respected. Revenue projections. Client lists. Growth metrics. But explanation assumes interest. And interest was never the point. Have you ever noticed when questions aren't meant to understand you, but to position you? The pattern became obvious long before tonight. Birthdays scheduled around my sister's availability. Family photos where I was slightly angled out. Inheritance conversations that always included her but never me. The disownment letter wasn't sudden. It was consistent. My independence embarrassed them. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded without permission. I'm not trying to change anything, I said calmly. I'm responding. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Responding to what? To the idea that I need this family to validate my value. Silence settled again. Not loud. Just heavier. My sister reached for her glass of water. Her nails tapped the crystal slightly. So what now? She asked. That was the real question. Not about the deal. Not about the letter. About power. Because tonight was supposed to redefine mine. Instead, it revealed theirs. And revelation makes people uncomfortable. I slid the acquisition document back into my envelope. I won't contest your decision, I said. My father blinked once. You won't? No. That startled them more than anger would have. Because conflict they understand. Withdrawal they don't. Have you ever realized that walking away removes the stage entirely? The disownment letter stayed on the table. Untouched now. Irrelevant. They thought they were removing my future. They didn't realize I had already built it. And as the waiter returned with dessert menus none of us wanted, I understood something clearly. They hadn't invited me here to lose a daughter. They invited me to confirm a story. But the story wasn't holding. And they were starting to see it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my childhood. I didn't revisit old wounds or list every time I felt sidelined. There was no dramatic confrontation. No trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. Just stillness. And stillness can be unsettling. My father leaned forward slightly. You're taking this very calmly, he said. Yes. Most people would be upset. Most people. As if I hadn't already grieved this family in quieter ways years ago. The first time they skipped my company's launch event because it conflicted with my sister's networking dinner. The time my mother introduced me at a wedding as figuring things out, while I was already managing 12 employees. The holidays where my seat felt like an afterthought. How long had I been preparing for this without realizing it? Emotional distance doesn't happen overnight. It builds gradually. Small moments that teach you not to expect too much. I used to wait for acknowledgement. A simple, "We're proud of you." It never came. Instead, I learned to build without applause. Across the table, my sister finally lowered her phone completely. The red recording light disappeared. That detail mattered. Because humiliation requires documentation. And suddenly, this wasn't humiliating. My mother cleared her throat. You're making this about money. I almost laughed. No, I said softly. You did. Because disownment isn't about love. It's about assets. Trusts. Control over legacy. It's financial language dressed up as emotional correction. The restaurant staff continued moving around us like we were any other table finishing dessert. The world doesn't pause for private shifts in power. But something had shifted. Not between us. Inside me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was free. Free from waiting for approval that would never be given honestly. Free from negotiating my worth at family dinners. Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop proving yourself is the moment people start questioning themselves? My father looked down at the acquisition paperwork again. 8 million, he repeated quietly. Yes. And you did this without us. There it was again. Without us. As if success is incomplete unless witnessed. I did it quietly, I said. The same way you taught me to survive quietly. That landed. Not as accusation. As fact. For the first time that evening, my parents looked older. Not physically. Just uncertain. They had planned a controlled demonstration. Instead, they had been confronted with independence. And independence doesn't ask for reconsideration. It simply exists. I folded the disownment letter neatly and placed it back in its envelope. You don't need to send this through lawyers, I said. I accept it. The acceptance unsettled them more than resistance would have. Because resistance keeps people engaged. Acceptance removes the leverage. I stood slowly. Not abruptly. Not theatrically. Just finished. And as I adjusted my coat, I realized something simple. They didn't disown me tonight. They formalized something that had already been true. The only difference now was that I no longer needed to stay. I stood slowly. Not abruptly. Not theatrically. Just finished. And as I adjusted my coat, I realized something simple. They didn't disown me tonight. They formalized something that had already been true. The only difference now was that I no longer needed to stay. Suggested pause, 2 to 3 seconds for emotional linger. Shall I continue with part 5? Yes. Part 5. I didn't leave immediately. That would have felt dramatic. Like storming out. Like proving them right about instability or emotion. Instead, I sat back down. The waiter brought dessert menus. My father waved them away. No one had the appetite for celebration anymore. You're overreacting, my sister said quietly. To what? I wondered. To being legally removed from a family trust in a public setting? To being positioned as a cautionary example between courses? But I didn't argue. Because this wasn't about reaction. It was about boundary. My father placed his palms flat on the table. If you walk away from this family, you're walking away from more than money, he said. The phrasing was careful. Controlled. Almost generous. More than money. What exactly was I losing? Access to gatherings where I was measured? Conversations where my career was simplified? Approval that arrived conditionally? Have you ever realized that sometimes the threat isn't losing something, it's realizing you never truly had it? I'm not walking away, I said calmly. You already did. My mother inhaled sharply at that. That's unfair. Maybe. But unfairness had never stopped them before. My sister leaned forward, voice lowering. You think this deal makes you untouchable? There it was. Not concern. Competition. This was never about values. It was about hierarchy. In our house, worth was visible. Public. Ranked. Tonight, the ranking had shifted. And that was the real disruption. I don't need to be untouchable, I replied. I just don't need to be dependent. The word dependent hung in the air longer than expected. Because dependency had always been the underlying structure of this family. Financial proximity. Emotional leverage. Strategic inclusion. The disownment letter was meant to reinforce that structure. Instead, it exposed it. My father's voice softened slightly. We did this to teach you something. I met his eyes. You did this to maintain control. Silence. The piano music continued somewhere near the bar. I reached into my bag again, not for more documents, but for my phone. I've already informed my legal team not to contest the trust amendment, I said. You'll have no pushback from me. That surprised them. No lawsuit. No challenge. No drawn-out battle. Just release. Sometimes the most destabilizing move isn't confrontation. It's refusal to compete. I stood again. This time, no one stopped me. And as I walked past the hostess stand, I realized something with unexpected clarity. They had expected my collapse. Instead, they witnessed my exit. And exits change the balance in ways entrances never do. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't send a final message. I simply reduced access. Calls went to voicemail. Emails were forwarded to my assistant. Invitations arrived and expired unanswered. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. The next week, my sister posted something online. A vague caption about choosing family over ego. Friends commented with sympathy. Support. Assumptions. I didn't respond. Have you ever noticed how narratives lose power when you refuse to participate in them? The disownment letter never went viral. The recording she tried to capture never had a dramatic breakdown to share. Without tears, without raised voices, without chaos, there was nothing compelling enough to distribute. Silence isn't cinematic. It's steady. At work, the acquisition closed smoothly. Integration meetings replaced dinner arguments. Contracts replaced accusations. I spent my mornings reviewing expansion plans instead of replaying conversations from that restaurant. Because once you stop defending yourself in the wrong room, you can build in the right one. A month later, my father requested a meeting. Not at a restaurant. At my office. That detail mattered. He sat across from me in a glass conference room overlooking the city. No audience. No phone angled to record. I may have miscalculated, he said carefully. Not apologized. Miscalculated. In business language. It almost made me smile. You assumed I needed the trust, I replied. I assumed you needed us. There it was. Need. The foundation of control. I folded my hands on the table. I wanted you, I said calmly. That's different. His expression shifted slightly. Not defeated. Just aware. We spoke for 20 minutes. Practical. Measured. No dramatic reconciliation. No emotional unraveling. Just two adults acknowledging distance. When he left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Because the disownment had not weakened me. It clarified me. And clarity is quieter than revenge. As I looked out over the skyline that evening, I understood something simple. They thought removing my inheritance would shrink me. Instead, it revealed that I had already outgrown it. 3 months after the dinner, I received a formal notice in the mail. Not from lawyers. From the bank managing the family trust. The amendment had been processed. My name officially removed. The language was cold. Administrative. Final. I placed it in a drawer without reading it twice. It didn't hurt the way they expected it to. Because loss only stings when you're still reaching for something. I wasn't reaching anymore. My sister tried once more to contact me. A short message. We didn't mean for it to go that far. I stared at it for a long time. What did that far mean? Public disownment? Legal exclusion? Or the moment they realized I didn't crumble? I didn't reply. Have you ever noticed how some apologies only surface when leverage disappears? At work, the acquisition began expanding faster than projected. Our client base doubled. We secured a partnership overseas. I wasn't celebrating loudly. I never have. But I allowed myself something I rarely did before. Contentment. Not the loud kind that demands acknowledgement. The steady kind that doesn't need witnesses. 6 months later, there was another family gathering. I wasn't invited. But this time, I wasn't aware of it through whispers or screenshots. I simply didn't know. And that felt lighter. For years, I had shaped myself around their expectations. Trying to align just enough to avoid confrontation. Trying to prove just enough to be included. Now, there was no inclusion to negotiate. No ranking system. No performance reviews disguised as concern. Just space. My father sent one final message late one evening. "You've built something impressive." Not, "We're proud." Not, "We were wrong." Just impressive. It was the closest he could come. I typed back slowly. "Thank you." And that was enough. Because closure doesn't always arrive as reconciliation. Sometimes it arrives as recognition. Not from them. From yourself. I didn't win that night at the restaurant. I didn't defeat anyone. I didn't expose secrets or take anything from them. I simply refused to collapse. And that refusal changed the story. They expected my breakdown. Instead, they watched my independence. And independence is difficult to argue with. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to like and share your thoughts below. Have you ever realized your strength in a room designed to weaken you? This wasn't the end of something. It was the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen.